Abby Dawson's heart pounded as the hot desert sun beat down on her back, the dry wind whipping her copper hair into wild tangles. She had been running for days, her body aching, her spirit worn thin, but she wouldn't stop. Not now. Not when her father's legacy hung in the balance. The leather-bound journal tucked tightly beneath her arm was all she had left of him now. William Dawson, a man who had dedicated his life to exposing the corruption of the land barons and officials, had died trying to bring the truth to light. And now, it was Abby's turn to finish what he had started. Her horse moved with slow, painful strides, but she didn't have time to rest. Behind her, the dust of the Arizona territory seemed to be following, as if the very earth was chasing her. Her father had uncovered everything, every name, every transaction, every betrayal. The journal in her hands contained it all, and it was enough to tear down the empire of lies that had cost her father his life. As she rode into the small clearing where a cabin stood, she could see the figure of a man standing in the doorway, watching her with cold, calculating eyes. Sam Hollister. She had come for shelter, but something told her this wasn't going to be a simple request for help. His presence was imposing, his features rugged from years of desert life. But there was something more behind his eyes, something that suggested he understood the weight she carried. "Riding alone isn't safe around here," Sam said, his voice low, rough, but not unkind. "And I don't reckon you were just passing through." Abby didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. The air between them thickened with unspoken understanding. She had been running from a law, from the bounty hunters that Porter's men had set on her trail. But that wasn't the only thing she was running from. It was the truth, her father's truth, that had made her a target. "I came for shelter," Abby said simply, her voice unwavering. "I'm not looking for company." Sam didn't respond right away. He simply stepped aside, motioning for her to enter. Abby hesitated, then rode her horse into the small, modest cabin. Inside, there was a warmth despite the simplicity. One small fire burning in the hearth, a table with a couple of chairs, a Winchester rifle mounted on the wall. "You're welcome to stay the night," Sam said, closing the door behind her, his eyes scanning the horizon outside. "But I won't pretend I don't know why you're really here." Abby set the journal on the table, her fingers brushing the leather cover before she looked up. "I need help," she admitted. "I can't do this alone." Sam watched her closely, his expression unreadable. "You've been running, and you've got that book," he said, nodding toward the journal. "But it's not just about survival anymore, is it?" Abby's throat tightened. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding in until Sam spoke. She had spent so long running, so long fearing that the truth would never be enough, that would get lost in the noise, buried beneath lies and corruption. But now, standing here with a stranger who understood more than she'd expected, she felt the weight of her father's death and the urgency of what was left undone. "Your father was a good man," Sam continued, his voice softer now. "He didn't die for nothing. But you'll need more than the truth if you're going to see it through." Abby's gaze locked with his, her voice steady despite the fear rising within her. "I don't care about the cost. I'll do whatever it takes." Sam studied her for a long moment, as if weighing something heavy in his mind. Finally, he nodded. "Then I'll help. But you should know, this is bigger than just you. They'll come for you, Abby. The men your father was trying to expose, they won't stop. Not until they've buried everything he uncovered." Abby's breath caught, but she forced herself to stay calm. The journal, the one thing that could bring down the men who had killed her father, was now in her hands. But she knew she couldn't do this alone. Not anymore. Her gaze flickered toward the door. "I need to get this to someone who can act on it. Someone who can stop Porter and Sinclair. I can't do it from here." Sam gave a slow nod. "Porter's men are already looking for you. If you want to get that journal to someone who can make it count, you'll have to move quickly. I know the back trails, ways to avoid them, but you'll need more than just a horse to outrun them." Abby clenched her fists at her sides. The fight for her father's justice was just beginning, and the road ahead was going to be harder than she could have ever imagined. But one thing was clear, she wasn't backing down. She couldn't. Abby nodded firmly, her resolve solidifying with each passing second. She had been running for too long, too afraid, too alone. Now, With Sam's help, she would finish what her father had started, no matter the cost. "You'll have to trust me, Abby," Sam said, breaking the silence. His voice was quiet, but there was a weight to it, one that Abby knew she couldn't ignore. "We'll leave first light tomorrow. No time to waste." Abby turned toward the small window, gazing out at the desert landscape stretching beneath the dimming sky. She had barely slept, and her thoughts churned restlessly. But she knew Sam was right. Waiting any longer would only make things worse. "Who can we trust?" she asked softly, her voice low but filled with the sharp edge of desperation. Sam paused for a moment before responding, his face hardening. "Not many. The ones who still care are few, and they're outnumbered. But there are a couple who could help. People who aren't afraid of Porter, who still remember what it was like before everything went dark." Abby's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't realized just how deep her father's fight for justice had gone. People like Sam, people who had witnessed the corruption firsthand but couldn't act, had been forced to live in silence, watching as those in power built their empire of lies. She clenched her fists, the journal's weight in her hand, a constant reminder of the truth that needed to come out. "Rebecca Hayes," Sam continued, his gaze never leaving the window. "She's one of the few who hasn't been cowed by Porter. She helped your mother escape once, before you were born. She's not the type to let this slide." "Rebecca Hayes," Abby murmured, the name carrying a weight she couldn't quite place. "Where is she now?" Sam met her gaze, his eyes flickering briefly with something she couldn't quite read. "She's hidden out in the north, at her sister's place. You'll need to go to her, Abby. She's the only one who might help us. If we're going to make it to Prescott, she's our best shot." Abby nodded. Prescott, 3 days right away, was their only hope of reaching justice. A federal judge, someone who might actually care about what had happened to her father. But as Sam had warned, Prescott wasn't a place of safety. It was the last place Porter's men would expect them ahead, but that didn't mean they wouldn't find them anyway. As Sam stood up to prepare for the journey ahead, Abby gathered her things. The journal, her meager belongings, and the strength of purpose she had carried from Copper Ridge. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about exposing the truth, about making sure her father's death hadn't been in vain, and maybe about finding a way to stop the cycle of violence and fear that had infected this land. The morning came too soon. Sam was already preparing their horses when Abby emerged from the cabin. The cold desert air bit at her skin, and she wrapped her arms around herself, grateful for the extra layers Sam had provided. They had to leave before daylight completely broke, before the heat of the day made the journey harder. Sam's horse, a sturdy bay, was already saddled and waiting. Abby's mare, though tired from the previous day's ride, seemed eager to go again. There was no time for hesitation. The clock was ticking, and every moment counted. "You ready?" Sam asked, his voice calm, but his eyes scanning the horizon as if waiting for something to appear. Abby climbed onto her mare, adjusting the reins and taking a deep breath. She hadn't ridden much since her father's death, but she had learned quickly, driven by the urgency of the task ahead. "Ready," she said, her voice steady, her resolve stronger than it had ever been. Sam nodded and kicked his horse into a slow trot, leading the way. Abby followed, keeping a careful distance but always within sight of him. The land stretched endlessly around them, dry, harsh, and unforgiving. It seemed as if the desert had swallowed every last piece of hope, every last chance for a better life. But Abby wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Not when she had so much at stake. As the hours passed, the landscape began to change. The dry, cracked earth gave way to rocky terrain, then sparse vegetation, and then the distant silhouette of the mountains that bordered the north. It felt like an eternity before they reached Rebecca's sister's house. The place was a modest cabin built into the base of the mountain, with a small garden growing around it. No one would have noticed it unless they were looking for it, and that's exactly how Rebecca liked it. When they arrived, Rebecca herself was standing by the door, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon before they landed on Sam and Abby. She looked older than Abby remembered, but there was no mistaking the steel in her gaze. "Abby Dawson," Rebecca said, her voice thick with both warmth and suspicion. "I didn't think I'd see the day you came back here. You got a lot of nerve." Abby didn't flinch. "I need your help," she said, her voice steady. "Porter's men are hunting me. I've got the journal, my father's journal, and we need to get to Prescott. But we can't do it alone." Rebecca took a long look at Abby, her eyes searching for something. Finally, she stepped aside, motioning for them to enter. "You've got guts. I'll give you that," Rebecca muttered. "I don't know what your father would have done without you. He wouldn't have wanted you involved in this." Abby's throat tightened. He didn't have a choice. And neither do I. The night passed quietly in Rebecca's cabin, but Abby couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. They couldn't stay in the cabin long. Even here in the mountains, they were too close to Copper Ridge, too close to the people who wanted her dead. But Rebecca had a plan, and she wasn't afraid to act. In the morning, after a meal that was more filling than Abby had tasted in days, Rebecca came to her with a piece of paper, an old map, crinkled at the edges and worn with use. "You'll take the northern pass," Rebecca said, tapping the map with her finger. "There's a place where you can cross into Prescott without being seen. It's not easy, but it's the only way. If you go through the main trail, you'll be spotted before you even make it halfway." Abby studied the map, her finger tracing the jagged path marked in ink. The northern pass wasn't just difficult, it was dangerous. But they had no choice. "Thank you," Abby said, her voice soft but filled with gratitude. She had no idea how much Rebecca had risked just by helping them. "We'll get to Prescott. We'll finish this." Rebecca's eyes softened, and for a moment, Abby saw a glimpse of the woman she had been before the world had turned dark. "Just make sure you're ready," Rebecca warned. "It's not just Porter you'll be running from. You'll be running from the whole system. Every crooked lawman and every man with enough power to keep this place under his thumb. If you're not ready for that fight, you won't make it." Abby stood up, meeting Rebecca's gaze with a quiet determination. "I'm ready." With that, the final leg of the journey began. The mountains loomed ahead, and though the path was treacherous, Abby had no doubt that, with Sam by her side, she could make it. For her father, for all the people who had been silenced by corruption, the road to Prescott wasn't just about surviving. It was about bringing justice, even if it meant risking everything. As the day wore on, the sun climbed higher, turning the mountainside into a furnace. The heat seemed to press down on Abby's shoulders, weighing her down, but she kept her head high, her eyes fixed on the jagged path ahead. Every step they took brought them closer to Prescott, to the justice her father had fought for. But the closer they got, the greater the sense of danger seemed to grow. Sam rode ahead, his figure outlined against the clear sky. Despite his injuries, his posture was firm, every movement sharp, as if he were always prepared for something to jump out of the shadows. His silence was a constant reminder of the weight on their shoulders. He had risked everything to help her, and now, as they rode through the rugged mountain passes, she couldn't help but feel the enormity of what they were doing. "How much farther?" Abby asked, breaking the quiet. Her voice was strained, as the day's heat made her throat dry. Sam glanced over his shoulder, his face unreadable. "Not much. We'll reach the crossing soon, but after that it gets trickier. We'll have to be quick." Abby nodded, feeling the tension in the air grow heavier with each passing moment. The northward trail they had been following was difficult, winding through narrow cliffs and thick underbrush, but it offered the element of surprise. The narrow passage was treacherous, but it was their only chance to avoid detection. Suddenly, Sam reined in his horse, halting abruptly. Abby pulled back on her reins, a sharp instinct warning her of danger. "What is it?" she asked, her voice low. Sam's eyes scanned the horizon, his brow furrowed in concentration. He seemed to be listening to something far in the distance. "Sound like hooves. Someone's riding hard." Abby's heart skipped a beat. She could already imagine Porter's men, galloping after them, driven by the greed and desperation of a man who wouldn't let go of his power. "How many?" she asked, her fingers tightening around the reins. "At least 4. Could be more," Sam replied. "We got to get moving." Now, they spurred their horses into action, pushing through the mountain pass with renewed urgency. The trail grew steeper, and the trees began to thin, giving way to the open expanse of desert land below. As they reached the top of the ridge, Sam stopped again, his expression tight. "We'll have to make it down this slope without being seen. If they're on our trail, we need to get ahead of them." Abby's gaze swept over the terrain ahead, her heart racing. It was a risky move, but it was the only choice they had. Sam turned his horse, leading the way down a narrow path toward a cluster of rocks below. The slope was steep and the ground was loose, but they had no other option. The sound of hooves grew louder behind them, signaling the hunters were getting closer. "Keep up," Sam shouted, his voice gruff with urgency. "We're almost there." Abby followed his lead, urging her horse faster as they descended the slope. The air was thick with dust, and the dry earth kicked up behind them like a storm. Her heart pounded in her chest as they reached the bottom, the rocky outcroppings providing just enough cover to hide their movements. For a moment, everything was still. The sound of the riders behind them faded, and Abby's breath came in ragged gasps as she realized they had gained some ground. Sam, too, seemed to relax, but only slightly. His eyes remained sharp, his every sense alert to the smallest sound. "Get off the trail," Sam whispered urgently, his hand signaling for Abby to move behind a cluster of boulders. Abby slid off her horse quickly, following his movements. Her body ached from the hours of riding, but she pushed through it, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. They crouched low behind the rocks, waiting in tense silence. The horses were still, breathing heavily but silent. Sam's hand hovered over the handle of his revolver as he watched the terrain ahead. Abby glanced at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you think they saw us?" "Not yet," Sam replied, his eyes narrowed. "But we need to keep moving. They'll figure it out soon enough." They waited, every second stretching out like an eternity. Abby's mind raced, wondering if they had enough time to get out of this alive, if they could reach Prescott with the journal and the evidence that would finally expose the corruption that had destroyed her family. After what felt like an eternity, Sam nodded, signaling for her to follow. "We move now," he said, his voice firm. "Don't look back. Just keep going." Abby's heart thundered in her chest as they began moving again, slipping through the rocky outcroppings in thick brush. Every step was cautious, every move calculated, but there was a part of her that couldn't shake the fear of being caught. As they made their way toward the crossing, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert floor. The land ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, the horizon a blur of heat and dust. But with each step, Abby felt the pull of Prescott growing closer. Justice, redemption, the truth, she could almost taste it. They reached the crossing at nightfall, and as Sam had predicted, the area was deserted save for a few scattered lights in the distance. The settlement was small and quiet, a far cry from the chaos of Copper Ridge. It was their last stop before Prescott, perhaps their last chance to escape without being caught. Sam moved cautiously through the settlement, his hand never far from his revolver. Abby kept close behind, her eyes scanning the darkened streets for any signs of danger. They entered a small, dimly lit building, where an older man sat behind the counter. His eyes flickered to Sam as they approached, but there was no recognition in his gaze. Sam spoke in low, measured tones, explaining their situation. The man nodded, his face grim but resolute. "Get your horses rested," the man said. "You're going to need them for the next leg of your journey." Abby's heart sank with the weight of everything that had happened. Her father's death, the journal, the journey ahead. She had no idea what awaited her in Prescott, but one thing was certain. She was closer than ever to the truth. And nothing at all was going to stop her from getting there. The man handed them a small key, leading them to a room where they could rest. Abby collapsed onto the narrow bed, exhaustion taking hold of her. Sam, ever vigilant, stayed by the window, his eyes trained on the shadows beyond. For a moment, there was peace, but Abby knew it was fleeting. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new risks, and the final confrontation with the powers that had sought to destroy her father's legacy. But for now, with Sam by her side, she let herself rest, knowing the fight was far from over, but it was one she would win. The night passed slowly, each hour a reminder of how much they had risked, how far they had come, and how much more they had yet to face. Abby lay awake for most of it, her thoughts racing, her mind unable to quiet the fears that echoed in her chest. The truth was so close, yet danger still clung to her like the desert dust. Sam's quiet breathing next to her was the only comfort in the silence. She finally drifted into a restless sleep, her dreams haunted by images of her father, his stern face, his unwavering belief in justice, and the terrible day he was taken from her. Abby couldn't shake the thought. What would he have done if he were here right now? Would he have trusted Sam the way she had? Would he have known what to do next? The morning light was barely a whisper on the horizon when Sam shook her awake. His voice was low, but there was a hard edge to it. We need to move. Now. Abby sat up quickly, her body protesting the sudden motion, but she didn't hesitate. They were close. Prescott, justice, the truth, everything was within their reach. Sam was already moving, packing their things with swift efficiency. His arm was still bandaged, the wounds from the bullet graze not fully healed, but he didn't show any sign of slowing down. Abby stood and quickly gathered her belongings, her hand touching the small metal box with the evidence she had risked everything to get. "Let's go," Sam said, his tone firm, his eyes scanning the quiet settlement as though danger could be lurking in every shadow. They made their way through the settlement as quietly as possible, the morning sun beginning to heat up the desert floor. It was still early enough that the streets were empty, but Abby couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. They reached the edge of the settlement, where Sam's plan to leave by the back path was put into motion. Every movement was calculated, every decision made with the awareness that one wrong step could cost them everything. As they neared the road to Prescott, Abby's heart began to race. The sound of hooves reached her ears, faint at first, but growing louder. Sam's hand went to his revolver instinctively, his posture shifting into the careful, defensive stance of a man who had lived too long in dangerous situations. "Stay behind me," Sam said quietly, his eyes narrowing. Abby nodded, her pulse quickening. She knew that the moment they stepped onto the main road, they would be exposed. The stagecoach to Prescott wasn't far, but if Porter or any of his men were close, it wouldn't matter how fast they ran. They wouldn't make it. They crouched low, hiding behind some brush and the sparse cover of the desert shrubs. Sam peered around the corner, his hand on the revolver again, ready. Abby's eyes darted to the road, then back to him. The moment stretched out like an eternity, each sound in the distance amplifying in the tense silence. Finally, Sam's gaze met hers. "It's a stagecoach," he said softly, but there was something in his eyes, something almost unreadable, that made Abby pause. "But we need to move now, before anyone sees us." They made their way to the road's edge, Sam leading the way with quick, deliberate steps. As they reached the open space, Abby's heart hammered in her chest. She could see the dust cloud rising from the horizon as the stagecoach approached, but she also saw movement in the distance, figures emerging from the shadows. "Men on horseback." "Porter's men," Abby whispered, her voice barely audible. Sam's eyes flashed with an almost predatory focus. "We need to get on that coach." Now, they broke into a run, moving as fast as they could without attracting too much attention. The stagecoach was getting closer, but so were the riders. There was no time to waste. Abby could feel the weight of the journal in her pocket, the knowledge that it held the key to everything. Her father's death, the corruption that had ruined so many lives. It was all in her hands now. Just as the stagecoach crested the rise, Abby raised her arm, signaling for it to stop. She could hear the driver calling to his horses, urging them to slow, but she wasn't sure if they would make it in time. "Stop!" she cried out, her voice breaking through the air. "Please stop." The horses came to a halt, but Abby's heart sank when she saw the figures of Porter's men galloping toward them, their rifles raised. The stagecoach guard lifted his shotgun, eyes narrowing on the approaching threat. "Get back," one of the men yelled, drawing his weapon and pointing it straight at Abby. Abby's hand gripped the derringer in her coat pocket. Her fingers trembled, but she steadied herself. She wasn't going to back down. "Please," Abby said, her voice strong now. "I need to get to Prescott. You don't understand. I have evidence, proof of everything. The guard hesitated, his expression torn between duty and the reality of the situation. Then, from the driver's perch, the sound of another voice, an unexpected one. "Stop, Jenkins," the voice commanded. "Let her on." Abby's breath caught in her throat, and she turned toward the source of the voice, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. There, standing tall and composed in a fine suit, was none other than Gregory Sinclair, the very man responsible for everything that had led her here. "Mr. Sinclair," she whispered, her heart sinking. Sinclair's cold, calculating gaze met hers, his lips curling into a slight, mocking smile. "Miss Dawson," he greeted her, his voice oozing with false civility. "I believe we've met before, though you look rather different now." "Let me pass," Abby demanded, her voice sharp. Sinclair's eyes glinted with amusement, but there was something more in them now. "Oh, I think not," he said, his tone turning colder. "But I'll allow you a ride to Prescott. After all, we wouldn't want you to be late for your final meeting." Abby's gut clenched. She knew this wasn't just a gesture of charity. It was a trap, and they were walking right into it. "Move," Sinclair ordered, signaling for the guards to lower their weapons. "Get her on the stage." Abby hesitated, her mind racing, but there was no choice. If they stayed out here, they were sitting ducks. Sam shot her a quick look before he followed her up onto the stagecoach. The moment she stepped inside, her eyes found the familiar faces of Turner and Mercer sitting quietly, their expressions unreadable. Sinclair sat across from her, his gaze fixed firmly on her. As the stagecoach rumbled toward Prescott, the air inside was thick with tension, every minute stretching into eternity. Abby's heart hammered in her chest, her mind torn between the glimmer of hope she felt for the justice that was so close and the fear of the trap that awaited her. Sinclair sat across from her, his icy gaze never leaving her face. He had taken the evidence, the journal, the proof that would bring down everything he had built. His confidence was unshaken, like a man who had already won, as if the battle was over before it had even begun. But Abby knew better. She couldn't afford to let him see her fear. "I must admit, Miss Dawson," Sinclair's voice broke the silence, smooth and cold, "you've been a thorn in my side. But you should know, I respect your determination. It's rare to see someone with the courage to challenge the powerful men behind the scenes." Abby didn't respond. Her eyes were focused on the window, watching the dusty road stretch out before them. Prescott was close now, but she could already feel the weight of the world pressing down on her. The courtroom, the federal judge, everything that awaited them. It all felt like a final test. "I'm sure you're wondering what happens next," Sinclair continued, his smile thin and cruel. "Let me make it simple. The evidence you've gathered, your father's journal, all of it will be destroyed. By tomorrow, no one will remember your name, Miss Dawson. No one will care." Abby turned her gaze back to him, her eyes hardening with a resolve she hadn't felt in days. "You've underestimated me, Sinclair," she said quietly. "You've underestimated my father. His fight for justice hasn't ended. It's just begun." Sinclair's smile faltered, but he quickly masked it with a look of mock amusement. "Brave words," he said, "but words don't change the truth." Before Abby could respond, the stagecoach jerked to a stop, the sound of hooves approaching fast. The driver shouted out, "There's trouble ahead." Abby's pulse quickened. She had no time to waste. The door of the stagecoach flew open, and in a flash, Sam Hollister was there, silhouetted against the bright sun, a rifle in hand. His presence alone was enough to send a chill through the air. Sam's eyes were locked on Sinclair, but it was Abby's face he focused on first, his expression filled with relief. "Thought you'd forgotten me, didn't you?" Sam said, his voice calm, though every line of his body betrayed the exhaustion of a man who had been through hell. "Sam!" Abby cried out, her voice filled with relief and joy. For a moment, the world seemed to stop as she watched him step closer, a silent understanding passing between them. "Miss Dawson," Sinclair sneered, his eyes narrowing. "You truly believe you can escape this? You're my world now." Sam didn't flinch. He took a step forward, the rifle steady in his hands, his gaze hard. "No, Sinclair," Sam said, his voice low and filled with finality. "We're in our world now, and this time you won't walk away." The guards who had been following Sinclair's lead hesitated, uncertainty creeping into their movements as they looked between their leader and the man with the rifle. "You can't stop me, Hollister," Sinclair spat. "I have the law on my side. This is over." "Is it?" Sam's voice was calm, but there was an undeniable steel in it. He motioned to the small group behind him. Mercer and Turner had arrived, too, their presence solidifying the weight of their collective power. "Justice is coming for you, Sinclair, and you won't have any more tricks to hide behind." Sam's words were like a final declaration, a vow that no one, not even Sinclair, could ignore. Sinclair's face twisted in fury, but there was a flicker of fear there, too. For the first time, he understood the severity of the situation. Before Sinclair could respond, Turner stepped forward, his voice firm and commanding. "You're under arrest, Mr. Sinclair. You've been indicted on charges of conspiracy, bribery, land fraud, and murder. This ends now." Sinclair opened his mouth to protest, but the sight of Mercer, once his loyal deputy, stepping forward, his weapon drawn, left him silent. The betrayal was palpable. Abby looked at Sam, then back at Sinclair, a sense of peace settling over her. "You may have thought you could control everything, but you didn't count on one thing," Abby said, her voice steady. "You didn't count on people like my father or people like Sam standing up to you." With Sinclair finally in custody and his empire of lies starting to crumble, the stagecoach resumed its journey. Abby sat beside Sam, the weight of what they had accomplished finally sinking in. Justice would prevail. Her father's work, his fight for truth, had not been in vain. As the stagecoach continued its journey, Abby turned to Sam, her voice softer now. "You've done more than I could ever thank you for," she said. "You risked everything for me for the truth." Sam glanced at her, his expression softening, the hard edges of the past few days easing just a little. "I promised your father I'd help you," he said quietly, "and I keep my promises." The horizon stretched ahead of them, and though there was still a long road to travel, a new sense of hope blossomed within Abby. The truth had won today, and she had found something she hadn't known she needed: a partner, a friend, and a future beyond the pain and loss that had defined her life for so long. As the stagecoach rumbled toward Prescott, toward the official end of the long road, Abby felt an unfamiliar lightness in her chest. The battle was over, and with it, the first flicker of a new beginning was born. The end.